I'm going to start with my template, heart.ait. This is a symmetrical shape, meaning when it was drawn in one half and then continued to be drawn theoretically exactly the same in the second half. So often my students, when they do an exercise like this, will say, can I just take the first half and copy it to form the second half? Yes, you can. Let's actually get to that point. The first thing I'm going to do is switch to my scissors tool, and I'm going to click here at the top anchor point and here at the very bottom anchor point in the middle. So I've now divided this shape into two pieces. When I switch to my selection tool, we can see that. While it's selected, I'm just going to delete it. Hit my delete key twice, and I'm left with half a heart, which sounds sad, but that's okay because we're going to restore it. If I click on this half with my selection tool, my black arrow, hold down my Option key, Alt-click on the PC, and add my Shift key just to make sure the top and the bottom remain aligned. I'll just drag this over. I've got half of the heart. Now I'll go to my tool panel, and I'm going to click on my Rotate tool here because hidden underneath it is my Reflect tool, and I'm going to choose that. Well, with my Reflect tool, so I've got my object selected. If I Option click or Alt click, so Option click on the Mac, Alt click on the PC, I can reflect this shape either horizontally or vertically. And if I move the window out of the way here, you can see that I have reflected that half of a shape. And all I need to do now is move it into position. And I'll switch to my selection tool and move it into position. Great, we're all done, right? Actually not. I still have two open paths. I want to join these into a shape. So if I switch to my direct selection tool, my white arrow, and I drag a marquee around these two endpoints, I can go to my object menu and I can drag down to path and over to join. And Illustrator will take those two open endpoints of those paths and join them. So let's do the bottom. Drag out a marquee, go to my object menu, drag down to path, and over to join. The keyboard shortcut is Command J on the Mac or Control J on the PC. And when I do that, I now have a closed path which creates a shape. So let me switch to my magnifying glass. I'm going to hold down my space bar and my Command key on the Mac or my Control key on the PC, and I'm going to zoom in on this bottom point here. And I'll just hold down my space bar to get my grabber hand and reposition it. If I click on this endpoint and hold it, you'll see that Illustrator actually added a second point to close the path. So even though you have a closed path, you may actually want to go in and do some cleanup. So let me undo that to move it back where it was. And I'm going to zoom in as tightly as I can until I can see those two separate points. So we've got here and here. And this is again where it gets a little tricky. I'll switch to my pen tool, and if I position it over that anchor point, I'm going to click to remove it. I can do this one, or I can do this one. So if I zoom out again, of course I can't really see the point very well, I'm not sure which one I'm working with, but what I want to be really careful about is removing it and changing the curve. So let's see what happens. So this curve moved slightly, but I don't think it's too bad. Let's check out what happened on top. You can see it actually did not join the curve. This sometimes happens. If I switch to my direct selection tool, and I click one of those endpoints and I move it over the other, you can see that there's this little chunk out of the path. I'm going to try it again. I'm going to drag my marquee with my direct selection tool. And this time I'll use the keyboard shortcut, Command J or Control J. And now you can see I've got a nice sharp point there. And let me fit to Window, Command 0 on the Mac or Control 0 on the PC, and just make sure that my curves are the way that I want them. And they look pretty good. So I'll switch to my selection tool, black arrow, click on that heart, go to my swatches panel, fill it with red. So I accidentally filled the stroke with red. Here's another trick for you. If I do this, which I do about 7 times a day, and this works in InDesign as well, if I accidentally apply the color to the stroke and I want to apply it to the fill, I can swap the fill and the stroke by holding down my Shift key and typing the letter X. The fill was none, the stroke was red, the fill is now red, the stroke is now none. It swaps the two of them. So Shift X will swap them. Just X will activate one or the other. If you look at the fill and the stroke boxes in my swatches panel, if I hold down my X key, the red, which is the fill, comes to the front. None, which is the stroke, goes to back. If I do it again, it reverses. So those are two shortcuts that I find very helpful, especially if I'm trying to work very quickly. X swaps the fill and the stroke to activate one or the other. Shift X swaps the actual colors, the fill and the stroke, back and forth. So it did take some work to take the existing half heart, the open path, duplicate it, reflect it, join it, and then edit the points. That's really a judgment call. Would it be easier to simply just continue drawing the heart with the pen tool and close the shape, or would it be easier to take the half shape, modify it, and join the two paths? That's up to you. Really comes down to how much you like or dislike using the pen tool.